Welcome. This is the Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing with James Nelson, the principal and head of Avison Young's Tri-State Investment Sales Group. In this program, you'll learn game-changing strategies to outperform the market. James will teach you how to source, execute, and capitalize on the best real estate opportunities in New York and around the world. Now, here's your host.
This podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. The opinions expressed are those of the guests and not their companies. Listeners should not act upon the information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, lawyer, or other professional.
Welcome to episode number 189 of the Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing. This is your host, James Nelson, coming to you from our new studios on the fourth floor of 530 Fifth Avenue, where Avison Young has our offices. Thank you to the team, Nick and Irene, for helping us with the setup here. It's fantastic, and looking forward to having guests show up and see the new studio. So for today, we've got a great episode with us. I'm going to be interviewing Bill Rudin, who's co-executive chairman of Rudin Management Company. I want to thank REBNY, the real estate board in New York. Bill was a former chairman of REBNY, and it was that relationship that has brought us together. And so we're going to be talking about today the civic responsibility and giving back and all the incredible things that Bill and his family have done for New York. The company was founded in 1925 by Samuel Rudin, is now led by its third and fourth generations. That's actually pretty rare, not just the longevity, but the fact that the family still has kept the portfolio not only going, but thriving. Today, the portfolio is comprised of residential buildings totaling more than 4 million square feet and commercial office buildings totaling more than 10 million square feet. So Bill's going to talk about sharing and staying true to the founder's guiding principles and also monitoring trends and how to make decisions. He really emphasizes, as I said before, the value of giving back to your community and getting involved in ways that you can help people in need. As always, you can go to jamesnelson.com. That's where you can find the show notes for this episode and how to connect with Bill as well as Rudin Management Company. So we're going to have a brief word from our sponsor, and we'll get right into that interview with Bill Rudin.
A different approach to putting our clients first. Avison Young's Tri-State Investment Sales Group sells multifamily, office, retail, development, and specialty sales throughout the New York metro area. As experienced thought leaders in their industry, our 35-member group is available to help you make informed investment decisions by advising you on your current holdings or identifying new opportunities in the marketplace. Our one unified team is built on an industry-unique platform which promotes unparalleled collaboration and teamwork. We share core values of hard work, integrity, and expertise. We put our clients first, providing tailor-made strategies to achieve superior results. Please visit us at aytristateinvestmentsales.com and follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at James Nelson NYC to learn more.
Okay, welcome everyone. With us today, Bill Rudin, who is co-executive chairman of Rudin. Their real estate portfolio includes 15 office towers spanning over 10 million square feet of space, 17 luxury apartment buildings, and developed the Greenwich Lane, a world-class residential project, all located here in New York City. I want to especially thank the Real Estate Board of New York. Bill was their former chairman, who was kind enough to help us put this together, and really looking forward to the conversation. So thank you, Bill, so much for joining.
Well, it's great to be here. And, I think on your background there, I can see some of our buildings right there, right over your right shoulder is One Battery Park Plaza, right off of the Battery Park, which I was a former chairman of. So that picture says it all about New York City and what a great city it is.
Absolutely. And very timely, because I think I also saw in the news, you just did 2 leases down there. So in this market, we love hearing about leases.
We're trying. Depends on where it is. But yeah, we're our leasing guys are busy, and, we'll get into that market in a moment, I'm sure.
For those who don't know Rudin, maybe talk a little bit about the history. I'd read founded, I guess, was it your grandfather? Was it 1925? Maybe talk about how the firm started and how through the generations that you've built it to the portfolio it is today.
Well, next year we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary of the founding of Rudin Management, which is sort of like the management company that runs all of our individual buildings, residential, commercial. And it was really Sam Rudin, my grandfather. He was one of 9 siblings. His parents had immigrated to the United States in the 1880s. And Louis Rudinsky, I think, was his given name. He had a different name while he was in Russia, a place called Minsk and Pinsk, which during the Ukrainian war, people heard about Belarus and Minsk and Pinsk. And it's sort of ironic, history sort of repeating itself. He at 15 years old, Louis was going to be conscripted into, I think, was the Russian army to fight the Polish army. I'm not sure which side, but he didn't want to go into the army. He was a conscientious objector before probably that expression never came came to being. But he also he left Russia because as a Jew, he couldn't own any real estate and he couldn't practice his religion. So he came to the United States, and where did he come into? Literally right over your shoulder onto the right is Castle Clinton. And before 1900, before Ellis Island was created, Castle Clinton was the United States immigrant depot where people came in and got checked, health-wise, and were processed. So about 8 million Jews, Irish, every race, color, and creed came, seeking economic and religious freedom, came to the United States and came through Castle Clinton and the Battery. He came in with nothing. He started a dry goods store on the Lower East Side, and he always had a desire to own real estate. After a while, he had, saved some money. And as the story goes, John D. Rockefeller Sr. would take his horse and buggy, literally again over your shoulder, your right shoulder, from 26 Broadway, where Standard Oil had their headquarters at the tip of Lower Manhattan. And he would take the drive up Broadway. And along the way, he would stop along to stores to make sure they were selling his kerosene. And Louis and his wife, Rachel, had a store on Christie Street. This is the legend as it goes. He came into the store one day and, obviously they knew who it was. And, Louis, are you selling my kerosene? Yes, of course, Mr. Rockefeller, we are. And they chit-chatted. And as they're walking out to the horse, the horse and buggy, my great-grandfather said, Mr. Rockefeller, where do you live? Because I live on 54th Street. So flash forward a year or two, and Louis' attorney came to him and said, Louis, I've got a property for you to buy. He goes, where is it? He goes, on 54th Street. He goes, I'll buy it. I think it was $5,000. And he says, in 1905, the attorney goes, well, Louis, don't you want to go look at it? He goes, no. If 54th Street's good enough for the Rockefellers, it's good enough for Louis. My grandfather didn't realize, though, was Mr. Rockefeller's mansion was, on the west side between 5th and 6th, across the street where the Museum of Modern Art is, and the Rockefeller mansion is still there. It's a landmark. But this property was between Lexington and 3rd, and literally on the wrong side of the tracks, because in 1905, Grand Central Railroad was an open cut dividing Park Avenue, and the mansions were to the west, and the stables and the servants' quarters or the helps' quarters were on the east side. Louis it didn't matter to him. He bought it in 1905, and it was a 5-story walk up. But then there was a crash of 1907, the famous '07 crash, where J.P. Morgan saved the United States, had all the bankers together, and they backstopped the U.S. Treasury. But all the tenants in the building left. And so Louis and Rachel moved their family, the 9 children, up to 54th between Lex and 3rd. My grandfather and his siblings went to school literally on the site that I'm sitting on at 345 Park Avenue. There was a school on Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street. And on Louis' deathbed, he told his son, Sam, never to sell this property and to, buy more. And Sam, who was not the oldest, but became sort of the leader of the family and the pack, followed Louis' advice, assembled the site. And we have 2 buildings on that site. Now we have 641 Lex on 54th Street, a, 350,000 square foot office building. And then on 55th Street, 6 East 55th Street, an apartment building. So that's sort of the, how the start. And then, so in 1925, Sam incorporated Rudin Management. He bought his first property, new development. He was buying properties on the west side, particularly only residential. But he bought at that point in time in 1924, 25, he had moved with his wife May up into Throgs Neck, and he would take the subway home. I think the 6th line, and the terminus of the 6th line was Benson Street, 1400 Benson Street. He saw this vacant lot, and he bought that site, and he built his first apartment building there. And that's my father and uncle were brought up in Throgs Neck and went to DeWitt Clinton High School. And then after the war, Sam's 2 sons, Jack, my uncle, and Lou, my father, got into the business. There were other family members, and off to the races. He was a voracious builder. He was really a futuristic urbanist who believed that if you built an office building, you needed to build an apartment building for the workers to have a place to work. So if you look at the arc of our business, particularly in the 50s and the 60s, first half of the 70s, whenever we'd build an office building, you'd see us also building an apartment building. And he also believed in the power of mass transportation. His philosophy was, if you can't get there by subway, I don't want to own it. So if you look at our locations of our buildings, they are in relatively either right next to, or some of them are integrated, like at 560 Lexington Avenue, the subway's right into our plaza, or within 2 or 3 block walking distance. So that's sort of the background of the family. Then in the 70s, mid 70s, my cousin and I and my sister and his sister got into the business. And then, unfortunately, my father died after 9/11. He had nothing to do with 9/11, but he was very sick with bladder cancer. And, I remember going to his apartment. He actually, ironically, lived at 136 East 55th Street on the top floor in a beautiful penthouse. And I had to go over and tell him what had happened downtown. And, it was a very difficult conversation I had with him. And near the end of his life, he when he decided not to take any more treatment, and this is the way my father was, he said, I want to say goodbye to all my friends and everybody, who've been involved in his life. So we called everybody up, and they, we did it in shifts, and they went up to the bedroom, and I'll never forget, Hillary Clinton was there, was then U.S. Senator for New York. And he grabbed her hand and said, don't let my city be destroyed. And it was a very touching moment. And she promised we would all work together in the Rudin way and, bring the city back together. So I could go on and on about my family history, but, as my cousin and I are 3rd generation, we now have running our business, my daughter and son, Samantha Rudin Earls and Michael Rudin. They are now co-CEOs. Eric and I are co-executive chair. And we made this transition over the last couple of years and officially made it happen on January 1st. And it's incredible to be able to have a front row seat to see the next generation, follow the philosophy that, Sam, Jack, and Lou had established. And then Eric and I and our generation, push forward, but to see them and their contemporary ways of doing things, moving our company, and obviously a very difficult, environment, particularly for commercial real estate. And, it's incredible. We literally just yesterday had a company town hall. We do this a couple of times a year. in our building at 3 Times Square, which we've totally repositioned. We have a new amenity space on the 16th floor, which is incredible, beautiful. So we had, 170, 180 people up, and we did a whole presentation and updated the company on where we are and where we hope to be going. And they did an incredible job. And, as a father, I'm very proud to see that they have committed themselves, again, not in an easy environment that we're living in now. And, high interest rates, high inflation, wars, turmoil, coming out of COVID, all the things that we know that have, happened over the last few years. But, when I walked out of 3 Times Square about 6:00 and you started walking up north, the amount of people that were on the streets, and, it was Wednesday's matinee day, and so a lot of people coming and going, the workers and the tourists. And it was energizing being in our meeting and hearing the plans. And my cousin, I opened up the meeting, and Samantha and Michael, new president, Neil Gupta, our first non-family member being president, did their presentation, and Eric finished it. We did a little ribbon cutting and then had a reception for all of our employees who stayed, till 6:30 or 7:00. And, it was a great way to, mingle. And we're, when I walk around our office, it's a lot of new faces, a lot of transition that's happened. People have retired, a lot of people that I used to work with. And there's a whole new, generation of people working in our company in leadership roles. And so it's for me, it's great to see that, and the camaraderie and the understanding. We were very clear, like, we got to roll up our sleeves and work hard together, and, batten down the hatches to get through this difficult period of time. And everybody's up to the task, and everybody's, understands what we need to do. And so it to me, my final words were, I look around the room and I see, a bright future. We got to tackle issues. We got to do things differently, and they are doing things differently than what we used to do. But that's good, and change is positive. And it was a day before, some of us had been to a lunch, the economic club, where Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, was speaking. And he and I quoted him in my presentation that nothing is divinely ordained. There's no, success isn't divinely ordained for us as individuals, for us as companies, for us as a city, as a state, as a nation. You just can't rest on your laurels. And he was making the point that, when he started in the business, the majority of the workforce for JP Morgan, obviously it's an international firm. A lot of them were in New York City. Now they're all over the country. They're in Florida, they're in Texas, or wherever. And, our city and, we need to fight for the right things, the right laws, the right regulations, all the things that are important to attract and retain, companies to fill up, the buildings behind you and behind me, and create opportunities for people to fulfill their dream, just like Louis Rudinsky did, and have opportunities. And if we don't, as an industry, stand up and voice the things that we think are important, whether it's taxes, affordable housing, crime, education, and doing it in a way that does not scare people away from our city, we have to be that voice of common sense and reason. And obviously, real estate, developers are not high on the list of where people think, that we're all out for ourselves. And the reality is, as my father used to say, we're only as good as New York City, right? We can't put our buildings on wheels and move them across the George Washington Bridge. So that philosophy of caring and helping out institutions, philanthropic organizations, is something that, is in our DNA, and what, my children and my cousins and everybody's involved with philanthropic organizations, whether it's my sister at the Whitney Museum and myself at the Battery and Michael at First Tee and Samantha with the Roundabout, Eric, Central Park Conservancy, and other organizations. His wife runs New 42nd Street, the non-for-profit theater group in Times Square, which was a key driver in the rebirth of Times Square. So we encourage our employees to get involved. We actually just did last Friday in celebration of Earth Day, had volunteer day down at the Battery. I know nearly 90 of our employees, including my children and my grandson, my 2-year-old grandson, Ollie, in there, rolling up their sleeves, moving dirt around, getting weeds out and getting ready for the spring. So that's all part of our ethos and our, and how we, get involved, not just in our own business, but the area around our buildings and in New York City.
Wow. Well, Bill, I want to start by thanking you and everything that you and your family have done for the industry and for our city. And I know it has been a tradition. I mean, I remember, this is before I got into the business, but I remember reading about when New York City was about to go bankrupt. And if I'm not mistaken, your father was a really big part. I think as the story goes, they advanced their property taxes and that allowed our government to stay open. So that this tradition has been passed on from generation to generation. And it's really wonderful to see.
Before my father passed away, about a year before he got sick, he started doing an oral diary. He had this woman come up and they would sit in the office and do what I'm doing right now, but they would, record it. And he would tell these stories, right? This is how I learned, the history. And he would go back to, his grandfather and then talk about, what he and his brother did. And so he did that for about a year, and we had these audio tapes. And then unfortunately he passed away, and I couldn't get myself in the right mind headspace to listen to the audios because it was just too fresh. But about 6 months later, I'm in the car and I put one of them, and there was a CD, I put it in and I started listening to it. And it was just incredible, and it was, near the end, you could hear him getting tired and, he was getting progressively sick. And I said to myself, we need to take this. There's a bigger story in what he was trying to accomplish. And I hired a friend of mine to produce a video, and we used his audio and integrated it. So he was present in the video. We had clips of him being interviewed, and we interviewed people that he dealt with, and whether it was family members, his wife, me, my sister, my cousins, my kids, my niece, nephews, a whole panoply of people, business leaders and political leaders, Walter Wriston, who used to run Citibank, and David Dinkins and Hugh Carey. And, some of these names may not be familiar to some of your audience members, but these were the political leadership of the 70s. Ed Koch, he was friendly with Barbara Walters. He was friendly with Michael Douglas. And we had a whole host of, George, President Bush, 41. My dad was very good friends with him. Gerald Ford, President Ford, who famously said, the headlines in the mid 70s, New York dropped dead. And I arranged to have as one of the people to be interviewed, I arranged to have him be interviewed. And I was told by his aides that I was not allowed to discuss that headline in the fiscal crisis of the 70s. So, so I put my notes down, and he came up. He just had a few Secret Service agents and no aides. We set up in our conference room, and my first question, Mr. President, thank you for coming up here. How did you meet Lou Rudin, my father? And he goes, I met him in the fiscal crisis of the 70s. And I'm like laughing to myself. I guess they didn't tell him he wasn't allowed to talk about it. But since, he brought it up, we went on. He goes, yeah, there was some headlines in the newspaper that said, I said, New York dropped dead. I never said those words. And so we went on and had a wonderful conversation. I thought, wow, this is pretty amazing. So one of the other people we interviewed was Hillary Clinton, and she was still a senator. And she came up with the phrase, we had gotten the 52nd Street and Park Avenue named Lou Rudin Way, because that's where my dad, our officer on 52nd and Park, when he would go to lunch, whether it was the Four Seasons or 21 or wherever it was, or the hot dog stand with Gus, the hot dog guy, he would stand there and he would conduct business on the corner of 52nd and Park. He made a deal with Blackstone to take 60,000 feet, the 345 in the mid 80s, whatever it was, coming and going. And when people were leaving the city in the 70s, he would be very, very upset because the CEO was leaving the city because they would say it's crime and it's transportation, it's this and that. But it was really, in his view, and it was documented, that they were moving up to Westchester or Connecticut because they wanted to be next to their golf course and have a better quality of life. And so by the mid 70s, the city was, heading way in the wrong direction, was about to go bankrupt. And he and a bunch of other real estate people and business people got together and came up with this idea of prepaying their real estate taxes to really bridge loan the city, because they were literally running out of money. And they did it, I think, 3 or 4 times and helped save the city, so they wouldn't go bankrupt. And it was an incredible, selfless act on so many people. I think they raised, hundreds of millions of dollars to prepay the taxes and meet payroll, and got them to the point where finally the federal government, even after Ford said drop dead, the federal government came in and provided support on financing. But, my dad at that point also started the Association for Better New York, which is an organization after he passed away that I became chairman of. And then when I became chairman of REBNY, Stephen Rubenstein, whose father, Howard, was also a founding member of ABNY, has taken over as chairman and has done a great job, and still going on. We had the mayor speak 2 weeks ago. The governor is coming to speak in a couple of weeks. And it's a great organization, still promoting, advocating, convening to fight for our great city. Because if we don't fight, who is going to fight? And so we, that's something, definitely taken away from being around my father and uncle. And I think my kids have done the same thing, understanding that connectivity between our business and the health of our city.
Mm-hmm. So coming up on 100 years, 4 generations, and I think I read somewhere that over 30 family members still involved in the business. Is that really kind of that shared ethos, if you will? Is that really what has kind of kept the family business together and to continue to grow? Because I'm sure there's a lot of family businesses out there that have, splintered off into dozens of different enterprises. The fact that you all have not only stuck together, but have continued to build on it. What do you think it is that has helped you prosper throughout the years?
It's really the 4 of us, Eric, my cousin, Sammy, and Michael. We have one other cousin who works in the commercial leasing side. All the other family members, and there are a lot of us, because remember, Sam had 8 brothers and sisters. So, some of them didn't have kids, but, so we've got a lot of cousins, and so they're stockholders, partners in some of our projects, not all of them. But yes, running a family business is not for the faint of heart. But if you were at that town hall meeting yesterday, you'd see, Eric, it's not his children, it's his cousins, smiling with pride, as much as my wife and I were sitting there, on what they've done and how they communicate with their cousins and have, great relationships all the way around. We have quarterly meetings. We try to update and communicate with our family members as best we can. I think they have faith and trust in us and how we're running the business. And we have to make hard decisions. So we just signed, it's in the real deal today. We had signed a contract a little while ago with a company to buy one of the family office buildings in Lower Manhattan, 80 Pine Street, which was an incredibly successful building built in the late 50s, and did our family very well for many, many decades. But the world has changed. And, particularly some big leases were rolling over. Tenants wanted different space. These are big floors, a lot of columns, particularly in the base of the building. We spent a lot of money renovating the lobby and doing amenity space. But the downtown market, unfortunately, is not in great shape. And so we made the decision as a family, working, communicating with everybody, that this was the right, not the greatest time, but the right time to exit this building. We have a contract out and hopefully close in the next couple of months. And I think, not 100% sure what the developer is going to do, but the buyer, but I think they're trending towards a conversion, like similar to what we did at 55 Broad with Nathan Berman and Larry Silverstein. Well, we kept a piece of the equity in that deal because we want to learn about conversion, because in the state budget that was just passed and using the downtown mid-90s plan, revitalization plan, where you went from 10,000 people living in Lower Manhattan to 70,000 people now, allowing conversions of obsolete office buildings, that was included in the budget, allowing buildings south of 96th Street and certain vintage buildings to be converted to residential. We need the mayor is going through the regulatory process now for his City of Yes, which will help expedite the conversions. It will make zoning changes that are very important to allow the multiple dwelling law to adapt to the new world that we're in and make these conversions economically viable. So, if you'd ask my father and uncle and grandfather, their mantra was never to sell a building, right? That was just something that they would never do. But unfortunately, these buildings, a lot of them were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in a totally different, they were modern for that age. Today, they're not modern. And as you well know, what are we seeing in the commercial market? We're seeing this tremendous flight to quality and a bifurcation of what tenants are looking for post-COVID to get their tenants, their employees back into the office, right? So they want spaces that are modern, high ceilings, environmentally friendly, amenitized, close to public transportation, and they are prepared to pay a premium. We're seeing that to achieve that. And we have a building at 52nd and Park Avenue where we're going to get several 100,000 feet back from KPMG at the end of 2025. And we have people lined up within the building and outside the building to take that space at very, very strong numbers. We're designing an amenity program for this building that will have a wellness center, have food offerings, have a restaurant, a grab and go, things that are very, very important for companies. We've got the space. We're in the design process now, and it will coincide when that lease, and be part of our marketing material for our tenants, prospective tenants, and for the tenants in the building, including our own employees. Well, when we showed them some of the plans, they were very excited. So this is what's going on. And so 345, okay, great. You go a few blocks away and some of our other buildings in this neighborhood on 52nd and 3rd, so literally 2 blocks away, and it's a world of difference. A building built in the 60s, low ceilings, columns, no amenities, and the economics just don't pencil out. So those type of buildings, you're already, hearing SL Green working on a building on 3rd Avenue for conversions, other purchases. There was one on on Broadway and 55th Street yesterday by Yellowstone. That will probably be either mixed use or all residential. So that's where the world is going, and we need to adapt our business plan to this changing environment. We're not a not-for-profit. We can't, we can't do deals that are not going to make any profitable sense or be able to be financed. So, we're looking at highest and best use for our buildings and doing analysis of that. We have a whole team that's looking at that. And so I think my father and uncle and grandfather would understand that, what we're trying to do, and be excited when we fully develop our plan, like at 55 Broad, which is well underway to being renovated, and hopefully, sometime in the beginning of 2025, start moving tenants in, residential tenants. And this is, we have a huge housing shortage, right? We have a lot of empty office space, but we don't have enough housing. So that shift, we think, will continue and have strong demand. People want to live in Manhattan. People want to walk to work. That's something that became evidently clear post-COVID. The building that my dad used to live in on 55th and Lex in the great financial crisis of 2008, that building, another building on 36 and Park, the young people got fired, and that building went from 95% occupancy to, low 80s overnight. And that happened COVID also. But what also happened when the vaccine started coming out, those two buildings were the fastest to start renting up. Why? Because the people were getting called back to the office and could walk to work. So those buildings were sort of, leading the pack, and all the other buildings caught up. So shifting gears, onto the positive side, the residential market is very, very strong. And so our properties are knock wood, are doing very, very well. And now we've got good cause eviction, not so great, but we'll work our way through it. And let's see what happens with, the governor's 485X, which is replacing 421A. Highly confident that people will take up the ability to do the conversions, which will be very, very positive, I think, for the city in the short, medium, and long term, to help alleviate some of the housing issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I certainly agree with that. And I'll have my white paper out shortly on the implications of the housing package. But yeah, I think it will spur a lot of office to residential conversion. Hopefully we'll see some much needed development.
It'll also take some inventory off the commercial market and, be helpful to simulate, I left out important data. So where I am on Park Avenue, 52nd Street, that, the Plaza Grand Central district has a sub 10% vacancy. But you go to Third Avenue, you have a 30% vacancy. I think the average throughout the city is about, and this better than I do, is around 20%. But in the high end Class A buildings, the vacancy is relatively low. And it's interesting. I think last year, I'm looking at a stat right now, 73% of the leasing activity since January of 23 was in a building that has some sort of amenity, food, gym, conference, wellness. So that's a trend that's telling you that's where the market's going. And that's why we as developers need to, be looking at that. And that's what we did at 3 Times Square. We did a new lobby in the amenity space, the gym downstairs, and we're getting very good traction. I think we just hit 60% leasing there and I met one of the tenants that we just signed a lease with, a law firm, Kilpatrick. They were taking a tour of their space under construction. And he told me, and he came down to look onto the 16th floor, our amenity floor. And he goes, Bill, I got to tell you something. Of all the spaces we looked at, in all the buildings, so it's got to be at least, a dozen, maybe even more, your amenity space is the best space we've seen. So that was a great affirmation of what we did. And it helped us get, pretty good rents for Times Square. So another stat, I'm sure you know, last year, I think there was nearly 140 leases in double-digit rents that were signed. So north of $100, some 150, some at 200. And so that's what I said at the beginning, that there's a premium that tenants will pay if they're getting the right type of product. And so that's where you're seeing a tremendous shift in deals getting done and what the owner has put into their properties.
Yeah, there's no doubt been a flight to quality, and it's been really amazing to see how you all have embraced technology and environmental considerations as well. I know with 3 Times Square, you had the health safety rating and really prioritizing the health and wellness, which has been great to see. And be excited to hear more about your plans to co-develop with Vornado, a 62-story tower at 350 Park Avenue for Citadel. So anything you could share with that? Again, incredibly exciting thing for the city. And
in about 7 or 8 years, my views will be blocked by that building. It's literally right outside my window. I look at 350 Park Avenue every day. This was my grandfather's office, and then it was my uncle's office, and now it's my office. And a friend of mine who's a congressman came up, in January, February, and he goes like, "They still let you have the corner office?" Like, talking about my kids. I go, "Yeah, they're letting me keep it for a while." So, and they go, "Why am I meeting with you? I should be meeting with them." I said, "Go, be my guest." But yes, it's very, very exciting. And the mayor announced that at an Amity breakfast a couple of weeks ago, where we started the ULURP process and filed an application. So we'll be going through the regulatory approval process. And this is something that Steve Roth and ourselves have been talking about and working on together for at least 10 years. He really led the industry in getting Midtown East zoning changed that allows the tearing down of obsolete office buildings and up zones the Midtown East area from Madison to Park. And it started in the Bloomberg administration, and it didn't happen. And then de Blasio came in and got it done in 2017. And right after 6-8 months after that, Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan announced that they were going to build their new world headquarters on the site of their existing headquarters. They had to find other spaces in the neighborhood, which they did. They tore down the SOM designed 270, which was a modern building, but it had reached its useful life. They needed new trading floors. They needed environmentally friendly space. So that development really was the catalyst because a lot of tenants in the mid-teens of the 20s were moving to Hudson Yards and other parts of the city because they couldn't find modern space. But it also accelerated owners of existing buildings at Park Avenue to renovate their buildings, which almost every building on Park Avenue, Seagram Building, Lieber House, our building, 399, the Fisher's Building, 2 buildings on Park have done that. And we started getting tenants coming back into Midtown East. And then you had East Side Access open up a couple of years ago, which was very important. But so the Vornado team and the Rudin team came together. We own the building behind 350 Park, 40 East 52nd Street, which was BlackRock's headquarters for a couple of decades. They moved out to Hudson Yards as an example of, they wanted a new modern building. And so we joint ventured. We bought another little piece on 51st Street. And Steve Roth had a very good relationship with Ken Griffin, who's the founder and CEO of Citadel and Citadel Securities. And even though they had just signed a lease and were moving into 425 Park Avenue, they were growing. They're a huge company. They had just announced they were leaving Chicago and moving a lot of people to Chicago, but they're also moving a lot of people to New York City. They have a tremendous ethos of working this. They were 5 days a week coming into, during COVID, having that, collaboration and being together is a very important part of how they run their business. And over a period of about a year, we negotiated a deal with Ken and his team and the Rudin team and the Vernado team. And we're going to build a 1,700,000 or 800,000 foot building, 62 stories high. I think the second tallest building in the city. And they're going to occupy 700,000 or 800,000 feet of it and be the lead tenant. Ken is our partner. And what better way to, continue and establish and reaffirm New York as the financial capital of the world than having, Ken and his team have their New York headquarters at 350 Park. So it's a very, very exciting project. It's going to take, multiple years to accomplish. But, I'll have a front row seat to the development of this great Norman Foster design, green state-of-the-art building.
It's no doubt a huge vote of confidence for New York. And after Chicago, I thought, and yes, of course, they're here with 425, but also made it clear that they're setting up shop in Miami. So to see that they've come and made a major commitment here in New York, and as you mentioned, to really establish this as the financial capital of the world, just vital at this time. And I guess,
and I'm going to ask a rhetorical question: why? And the answer is why? Because New York has the talent, but then this leads into this: nothing is preordained success, right? So we have the talent. We have to continue to provide the infrastructure, public transportation. The East Side Access is great. We have to educate our kids. We have to provide housing, and all of these things need to continue to. We can't rest on our laurels, as Jamie said. We have to keep pushing forward. And the young people want to be here. That's who the market is for these converted apartments. They're highly amenitized, pools and gyms and lounges. And they're small apartments. They're not apartments that Sam Rudin built at 215 East 68th Street. That's a 700-foot, studio, right? A 700-foot apartment now is a 1 or 2 bedroom, right? It's all shrunk wrapped, but they have amenities, and the young people are going to work, whether it's Citadel or JP Morgan or Evercore or wherever, and they're really not in their apartments that much because they work, 12 hours a day. They just need a place to shower and get a quick meal and get back into the office the next day. So that's very, very important, I think, for the future. And you'll see, I think, thousands of units, hopefully in the next 4 or 5 years, come on the market in Midtown that will, I think, fill a very important need for our city.
No doubt. So, Bill, you already gave a lot of the reason, I'm sure, why you've continued to invest here in New York, but it still begs the question, and certainly we saw a lot of your contemporaries, certainly after COVID, start to diversify, go into different markets, and yet Rudin's holdings, if I'm not mistaken, are still entirely here in New York City. So have you ever thought about going into different markets? Obviously, you do a lot of office, multifamily, some retail mixed-use components, but even maybe different asset types. So why you've continued to focus on New York City and what you know best?
Well, this is also a legacy. I mean, we know this market where our brand is well known. The Rudin name is synonymous with quality, and both on the commercial and residential side. But I think that's a question really for the next generation. I think what we've learned is we need to diversify. Our diversification is owning office and residential, like right now. So the residential market's doing strong. That's helping us out. Commercial, not so strong. But we've dipped our toes into some other things, that outside the city in terms of debt structures and things like that, just to understand that. And those investments, although they're not, being a developer have given us a taste of different markets, and we'll see. I think we need to get this transition from my generation to the next generation fully integrated, and deal with some of the issues, like some of the older office buildings, see where we can, take advantage of the conversion opportunities, and then look at, where we're best to allocate our capital. So that's all, we're constantly looking at our business models and our strategies, and have a lot of discussions about that. But right now we're in a little bit of a hand-to-hand combat, right? Dealing with, the Class B type of buildings and investing in our residential portfolio. We've added gyms, we've added other amenities, in a building on Park Avenue, we're adding an outdoor ground floor terrace with a fireplace and a lounge. And so we're spending, millions of dollars, making sure that our properties are competitive and up to speed. And that takes a lot of time and effort. But the future, who knows what direction that takes. But yes, we have to keep an eye out on over the horizon, as my dad used to say, to see where those next opportunities will play themselves out.
Wonderful. So, Bill, with only a couple minutes left, I'd love for you to give some advice to our listeners, our viewers. Public service has been so ingrained in giving back, all the charitable works that you do. Why is that important? Why would you urge someone maybe who's even new to the business to get involved? And maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's sitting on a community board, maybe at some point in their careers running for city council. I mean, why is that important?
But believe it or not, in the late 70s and early 80s, I was on community board number 5. And, I had to go over to a church on the west side, and it was an important experience for me as a young man in my 20s to see, sort of the sausage being made in terms of zoning and what people were looking for, and what was going on. It was, I think, very, very helpful to me. But again, as it goes back to what I said in the beginning, we need people's voices who are not far left, not far right, sort of, hitting the ball down the middle of the fairway, so to speak, who are moderate and understand that we need that interaction. We need businesses. We need, quality of life. We need all of these things that attract and retain the employees. So you have to get involved. You have to, whether it's get involved with REBNY or Young Men and Women's Real Estate Association or whatever organization. APNY, we have a, young leadership group there. We have, my daughter runs the women's committee of APNY, and it's all about meeting and networking and interacting and meeting new people and getting new ideas and having a conversation. And there's nothing better than being, involved in a philanthropy and seeing, whether you're writing a check or you're volunteering and everything in between to, help people who need help. That you walk around the city and you see obviously more homeless people in New York, and your heart goes out, but it comes back to, housing. Can we find appropriate housing for them? Can we give them the social services that they need, and the mental support that they need? And so so whatever you can do, it first of all, it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're not running away from the problem. You're facing the problem. And that was what my dad was fighting against. These CEOs would, leave the city and think that they were, escaping their problems, when in reality, 5 years later, they had crime up in Westchester or homelessness or drugs or whatever it is. You can't run away from the problems. So you have to engage. And, one of the great things that, my family's involved in, and something, again, started because of my father and uncle's interaction with, with Mayor Beam at the time back in the 70s and a gentleman by the name of Percy Sutton, who was the Manhattan Borough president. And some crazy guy named Fred LeBeau came to Percy Sutton and said, hey, we're going to take the New York City Marathon, which in the 70s was run around in Central Park like 6 times. And we're going to do for the bicentennial, 1976, we're going to have the race in all 5 boroughs. And everybody thought this guy was out of his freaking mind, right? And so in the 76, crime was up and people were leaving the city. At the press conference, people thought like people are going to get mugged, running on the streets. It was like not a very good start to the idea. But Percy Sutton came to Jack and Lou. Sam Rudin had just died in 1975. And they said, we need $25,000 to help get this race, going. And my father and uncle didn't even, didn't have to go to a committee, didn't have to go to, a board. They said, you got it, 25,000, but we want the trophy to be named after Sam Rudin, their father. And
that's great.
Percy went to the Roadrunners and they right away, and it was the Rudin family manufactured Hanover Trust, which is now JP Morgan Chase, Runners Magazine, a guy named George Hurst, ASIC, the running company, and a few other, Perrier. And that was the start of the New York City Marathon. I think there were a couple thousand runners. Nobody thought it could get done. It got done. And instead of just happening one time, they said, hey, we did this. We figured it out. The cooperation of the city was amazing. And they did it again. And then they did it again. And every year it went from 2,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 to now it's 50,000 runners. And if not the greatest day in New York City, one of the great days in New York City where everybody comes together. People come out and volunteer and they hand out water and, the medical tents, and there's all volunteers. So, something like that, it's a simple thing, but it's, we go to the starting line and see the races go off and see them go over the Verrazano Bridge, and then we run ahead to the finish line. And, it used to be my grandmother gave out the trophy, then my generation gave out the trophy, then my kids' generation gave out the trophy. And now we've got the 5th generation, my grandkids give out the trophy. And it's just an amazing day and amazing, sense of accomplishment when you see the elite runners finish, but more importantly, our friends, our family, our coworkers, who are running 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, and their effort to accomplish, something that's very, very meaningful. And it's a great experience. So whatever it is you do it full throttle, running the marathon, volunteering, doing whatever, helping soup kitchens, feed homeless people. You got to go out and do it. Just do it like Nike says. So that's my advice to young people, and get engaged. Get engaged in whatever it is that your passion is, and have your voice heard. Don't let the other people drown you out. Let your voice be heard. And, that's so critical for the future of our city and our country.
Bill, that's an incredible way to end. I mean, you have such an incredible story and your family's story, and just so appreciative of everything that you all have done, again, for the industry, for our city. And for those of you listening and watching this, I know you've gotten a ton out of this. And again, just take these words to heart and really take action. So thank you again for joining, Bill. Really appreciate it. And for those of you listening, thank you as all for sharing this podcast, or if you're seeing this on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, passing it along. We're out there to help inspire others to get into this incredible business and to give back. And that's what I really took away from this episode. So thank you again. Until next week, this is your host, James Nelson.
Thank you for listening to the Insider's Edge to Real Estate Investing. We appreciate your subscribing and sharing with your friends. If you haven't already, please connect with James at James Nelson NYC on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Please also visit jamesnelson.com, where you can find the show notes and other episodes, along with an exclusive video series and other helpful resources, so you can gain the insider's edge to real estate investing. Until next week.